Welcome to Authentically Debz, my podcast. A Southern girl looks at 70. Now that I'm pretty close to bringing you up to date on my life, I think there are a couple more things to add, and then I wanted to go back and throw in a couple of other things I forgot. Let's see. I was assaulted by one of my incarcerated youth on February 19. What happened was actually not the fault of the kid because he is emotionally disturbed and has many other problems. And of course, all of our incarcerated youth there have PTSD. They're usually fighting court cases. For him, it was, I'm trying to think what the charge was. Armed robbery. There we go. Anyway, this was a kid who was about 17, big, burly kind of kid, not very tall, maybe about 5'8", 5'9", but used to give me a bear hug every time I walked into his building, keeping in mind that they lived in the unit where I had my classroom. There was one probation staff there, that's the juvenile guards, who had a real problem with me, and I'm not sure why. I don't know if it was a racial thing, because I loved all of the other probation people, and you really have to function as a unit to be successful in that world. But that particular day, this woman was the probation guard at our classroom door. And interestingly, I don't usually document people, but this particular probation guard had been making my life quite miserable as a teacher for the 5 months that I was at Central Juvenile Hall. She would undermine my, how can I put this? She would undermine my class and my instruction. One day a student swiped my cell phone, no, it wasn't a cell phone. He swiped some candy bars that I had in a bottom drawer that I would sometimes use for rewards for different things in the classroom. As the students were going out, she found one of those candy bars, I think it was a Snickers, on the student, and she was at the door. I was at my desk. She literally threw it at me. I had to duck or it would have hit me in the head. She would not back me up when I had a problem with the students, and it was very specific things she did, and I had made a documented list of those because after a while, after trying to be cordial and even friendly, and finally just professionally with her, she was not cooperating on any level. So I began writing down methodically these things that she did to undermine me and my being a teacher or my being an educator in that classroom. And that particular day, I was going to turn it in to my principal, who would have then turned it in to her superior. But as it turned out, I was assaulted that day, so I didn't get to turn it in that day. But I did subsequently write the head of probation about her, and she was investigated. I'm not sure what happened. But basically what happened with her. But basically that day, the student comes into the classroom. He has not given me a bear hug. His eyes are wild. He is definitely not ready for school. The teachers do not make the call on that. The probation, the guards do. She let him come into the classroom. He was so angry. He had fire in his eyes, and he was walking around the classroom. He immediately said, "I'm not doing any fucking work." And I said, "Well, okay. I'd like for you to, but go ahead and take a seat." And he had a seat in class. This was also a student who was definitely not intellectually challenged, but he was far behind academically. He knew it. I think he was probably learning disabled, which is not the same at all as intellectually challenged. But he had missed so much school. In fact, I think probably the only time this kid was in school was when he was locked up, which for him was a lot. But he was very far behind in reading and writing and math. And he knew it. And he had asked me for a one-on-one. Now, I have an assistant, or what we call a paraeducator, that helps all of the students. But he needed someone to sit there with him, which was not really available to him all the time from me as the teacher, or even from my assistant who had other students to assist as well. I told him what he needed to do was to call his mother and ask her to call for what is called an IEP meeting, an independent education plan meeting, which a parent of any special education student in the United States, incarcerated or no, can call at any time. And she could have asked for a one-on-one for her son, and in all likelihood, she would have gotten it. Because in the world of education, pretty much parents rule. But he never did that. And I gave him the number and everything. So anyway, he's in the classroom and he's upset. He finally does take a seat. And I notice that he's not doing any of the work with us as I'm doing direct instruction. I call him on that. I said, why don't you take the next one or read the next one? And he just went off on me verbally. He was not, I'm not going to repeat everything he said, but it was full of expletives, vanity, ways in which this student just, I've heard him talk like that to his peers. I've heard him talk like that to other adults, to probation guards, but I've never heard him talk like that to me or my assistant, the teaching end of things. So I said, hey, you can't talk to me like that, so stop, because I don't want to have to restructure you. Restructure just meant I would call my principal. He'd come over and talk to the kid outside of the classroom when the kid was ready to come back in. When he was ready for school, he would give me a quick apology, and we'd go on with our day. Well, he, at that point, got up, went over to the door, and started talking to this probation guard woman, and stayed talking with her for about 10 minutes. I was, of course, hoping she would send him out because he was definitely not ready for school that day. And I thought at the very least she would de-escalate him. But looking back, I don't think I know she didn't de-escalate him. I mean, God knows what she said to him, and even possibly about me. But once he left the door where he was talking to her for at least 10 minutes, he just began wandering around the classroom. And I said, and I called his name, but I said, you can't just wander around the classroom. I'd like you to do some work. If you're not going to, then you're going to at least have to sit down in your seat if you want to stay in class. And he went off on me again verbally, not physically, verbally, even worse than before. At which point I said to him, you have not ever spoken to me like that. And if you don't sit down now and at least be quiet, whether you do any work or not, I'm going to have to write you up. Now, that's something you don't want to say to a student, particularly when they are as upset as he was. But this probation officer, this guard, really gave me no recourse. She would not send him out, and it was too late to just restructure him. I thought that's what she was doing when she was talking to him. So basically, I wrote the note, which is like a classroom suspension, which these kids don't want to get because anything in writing like this goes to their judge, which is not helpful to them. So, of course, the teacher doesn't want to do this in front of the kid. I handed her the note. He got up from his seat, went over and tried to look at the note that she had, which I'm sure she let him read. And then he came over to me. I was behind my desk at that point because he completely disrupted the direct instruction in the class. And he grabbed my laptop on my desk. He broke it in two. I can still hear the crunch. And then I looked to the left as she was approaching him, thinking there would be some type of backup guard or probation from the unit. As I looked to the left, he took the bottom half of my laptop, the hard drive, the heavy part, and threw it at my face. I went down immediately. I never lost consciousness, but I was in a daze. I was concussed, and I stayed down for about 5 minutes, during which time he was removed from the classroom. And finally, my assistant principal helped me to my feet about probably 7 or 8 minutes later and escorted me out of the classroom. From there, the paramedics came, took me in an ambulance to USC Med Center, which was not far from Central Juvenile Hall where this happened. And I remained there for most of the day. They ran all sorts of tests. Amazingly, the kid did not break my jaw, although I did look like, for real, I had a baseball in my cheek for about a good month. So I was out of school for about 6 weeks. Now, this would be, at the end of that time, would be about sometime in March. I had also requested, because I had tried to get a restraining order on the kid, but it was basically impossible. Probation was of no help to me. And I finally had to go to 3 or 4 courthouses and finally ended up at the big one downtown on Hill Street in Los Angeles, and got a restraining order. But it was such a lame restraining order. It gave me 100 yards of distance from him on the outside, but on the inside, it didn't give me anything. And since he would no longer be in my class, but since he was in the housing unit, that was just much too close. So I asked for a transfer to what is called one of our camps, Dorothy Kirby camp, which is also closer to where I live. So I thought, yeah, that's what I want. And they gave it to me. And like I said, I did turn in a very specific letter to the head of probation. And I got a response that they were going to investigate this probation officer, who shall remain nameless because I'm a decent person. So by the time I came back after recovering physically from this assault, everything was virtual. Everything was remote. And I was at a new site. But actually, I was home, working from home, like most people in the United States, if they can, are doing right now. So it was kind of a learning curve, learning how to teach online. But, basically got the hang of it, but basically hated it. It was very pressurized, not from the students. By the way, it's never the kids. It's never the students. It's always the bureaucracy or the staff or some kind of drama or bullshit politics. Also, I was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, from that incident, from that physical student assault on February 19th. I would get up in the morning, or I would wake up and I would feel very anxious, very depressed. I do have OCD, and I'm very familiar with those feelings, but I'm long past that. I know how to deal with that, and yet I could not get beyond it. I literally did not even want to get up in the mornings. So I talked to, and since this was a work-related injury, it was something that I had to deal with workman's compensation with. But at this point, I just saw my personal psychiatrist, and I said, I'm just not ready to stay because I hate this. I'm so unhappy. You can't see the students. They can't see you. No one's in the classroom with them other than the guard to try to make them stay on task, and the guard doesn't do that. They don't feel like it's their job. even though when a student is incarcerated, probation is legally their parent. Anyway, it was just a mess. I hated it. So I decided, with the support of my psychiatrist, to take off the rest of the school year, which by this time was sometime in May through the end of June, with something called temporary disability. And I would get paid just about as much as if I, was there. So, and I just needed a break. I was just feeling anxious and depressed the way I had felt years before having OCD. And I just couldn't stand feeling that way every day. So I took off for the rest of the year, all the rest of May and June. And during that time, I did work on this podcast. I did work on becoming an audiobook narrator. I did work on auditioning for casting directors, because everything is still, it'll open up soon, but everything is still pretty shut down in Hollywood and Atlanta, New York, wherever else. And so you have the opportunity, through the right connections, to get to see casting directors and let them hear you read. So I did all of that, but it was on my own schedule, and I was getting some rest, and I wasn't hating life anymore the way I was when I was working remotely. So my PTSD was definitely getting better. So I did return to teaching on July 1, keeping in mind that I want nothing more than to retire. But technically, you could say I needed to teach 2 more years. So I thought, okay, so I returned. And things, unfortunately, just didn't get better. We did get another principal, one of my dear friends, and I did end up getting to teach the subject matter I wanted to. But there was a person at the school whose job it was to assist teachers, but whose job she thought it was to run things. And with my friend coming in as principal and not knowing her way around Dorothy Kirby camp yet, this person was trying to run things and was making our life so stressful that I began experiencing the same thing I was before. I was team teaching with a good friend of mine, a colleague, an excellent teacher. She teaches general ed, I was teaching special ed. So we would create our own curriculum each week, and we would load it up, and that was another thing. There was a way that we didn't have to do this, that we could have gone with the larger school we were affiliated with and gone with their curriculum, which would have meant we had more choices and would have meant we didn't have to reinvent the wheel every week. During this time, this was leading up to our taking our 2 weeks of mandated summer vacation, consecutive weeks. And in order to be out for 2 weeks and come back on the 3rd week, we had to create and upload 3 weeks of 5-day curriculum. And that was a lot. We worked, oh my goodness, we worked, our hours were like 8 to 3, but we often worked until after 6 p.m. just on this curriculum. So it just remained very, very stressful. It didn't need to be. Very argumentative staff. It was just politics, and I didn't need any of this crap. At this point in my life, my interest is the arts and specific things I want to do. It will always be about the kids, the students for me. I'm a good teacher. I might even be a great teacher. But I know how to teach, and I know how to do curriculum. And all I wanted to do was do that and go home. And it was made impossible for me. So finally, about a week and a half ago, I guess the straw that broke the camel's back was this person trying to add yet another thing she wanted us to do as teachers when we were doing way, way above and beyond what we normally did in a regular physical classroom. And we're not getting paid any more for it. And we're getting so little back from the students, particularly my students who are very, very behavioral and work so hard on this curriculum packing. So I just decided a couple weeks ago that I was going to retire. I've been meditating, talked to God about it. So I'm just going to follow my gut, my soul, the universe. I'm retiring August 31st, 2020. And that happened. I think I'm going to stop it here because I want to mention something else that happened that was terribly significant and horrifically awful and sad. So, see you soon. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Authentically Debz. And if you like my show, please subscribe, leave a review, and definitely tell a friend. Oh, and make sure to visit my website where you can keep up with my current projects, learn a little more about me, and follow my latest news. And that website is www.deborahjangray.com. The spelling is Debora, no H, Jangray. And most importantly, blessings to everyone.